Hi, I'm Mike Ward. I want to take you through some quick tips and tricks that you can use in Excel, particularly when you're building a financial model. So let's jump in. Here is a very simple little model that I am busy building, and I'm going to take you through some things you might want to easily do with some shortcuts on the keyboard and so on. So let's start with the title. We've got a title up here. I've just typed it in, Excel tips, but maybe we would like to underline it. Control U gives you an underlining. If you want to go bold, Control B will make it bold. So we can easily do that. Let's keep going. Maybe I notice that my whole column is a little bit too narrow. Now, one thing you can do is you could just come up here and then you've got to find the little corner here and double click on this cell, this column line over here. It will widen automatically to the width you want, but that takes a bit of time. So I'm going to do Control Z, which undoes my last thing. And I'm going to show you that actually a quicker way, especially once you get used to working on the keyboard, is not to pick up the mouse, but to highlight the whole column. You can highlight a whole column with Control and the spacebar. And you can then use a quick keyboard formatting thing to widen the whole column to what you want. If you do Alt-H-O-I, Alt-HOI, you have to remember a few of these things, Alt-H-O-I, it'll widen the column because we've highlighted the column to anything that you want to. So similarly, for example, if we want to underline a whole row over here, we could come along here and highlight the row. Or in fact, I just needed to move it somewhere into the row anywhere here actually, and press the Shift spacebar. So Shift spacebar highlights a row and Control spacebar highlights the column. So let me Shift spacebar the row, and then I want to underline this row, put a line at the bottom. I'm going to use another quick keyboard shortcut, Alt-H-B-O, which stands for Home, Border, Bottom, Alt-H-B-O. And you will see that it has put a nice line all the way across Excel in my model. So that's quite useful. The next thing is, let's look at some formatting commands. Now you can see here, I've got some revenues, 1, 2, 3, 4. But there is a very nice set of shortcuts in Excel. If you press and hold the Shift and Control buttons down, and you press the exclamation mark or the number 1, you'll see it immediately puts this into 2 decimals with a space in the thousands. If you want to change the format, if you keep Shift and Control down and you press the letter 2, or in fact the @ sign, it converts the format to a time. If you press Shift Control 3, it converts it to a date. If you push Shift Control and 4, the $sign, it gives you a currency. You can see I'm working in rands here now with 2 decimal places. These are preset formats by Excel. If you want to convert something to a percentage, you push Shift Control and the % sign, or number 5, and it expresses it as a %. Or if you want it exponential, Shift Control and number 6. So you can see you can easily move through these formattings just by choosing Shift Control and the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on your keyboard. So that's quite helpful. So we've got some revenue, and we're working in thousands of dollars over here. We've underlined a few things, made some bold and underlined and so on. And maybe our cost of goods sold is going to be, let's say, 80% of revenue. Now we could type in a formula here. We could say this is going to be equal to 80% times our revenue, like that. And then we would come along here and format that if we wanted to. But actually, we prefer when we are dealing with things like parameters that we might want to change, to come down to the bottom of the spreadsheet somewhere, and we might have, for example, a variable called our cost of goods sold as a percent of sales. So I'm just typing that long thing in here. And I want to put the 80% down here into the model so that I can easily change this if I want to. So a very nice trick in Excel now is to push Shift Spacebar. That highlights the whole row. And then we want to label that row. Now you can come up to Excel's naming box over here, and you can type in that same formula. You can type in cost of goods sold percent sales. If you want to, there's a quick way of doing that, which I'll show you in a minute. And if you press enter, it labels the whole row. Now, instead of putting the actual formula in the cell with the 80% sign in here, what we can do now is we can say the cost of goods sold is going to be equal to our revenues times, and we put the little @ sign in because that's going to tell Excel that it must stay in the same column. And we start typing in the label that we gave that row. And you can see it's coming up here, cost of goods sold as a percentage of sales. And if you just highlight it and press the tab key, it puts it in for you. And you will see it's highlighting this whole row. And what this little @ sign is telling Excel to do is to go down in the same column and pick up that 80% sign. And then you can just type, press enter, and you've got your formula. And it's easy for people to audit this now. They can actually see what you're doing. So naming stuff is helpful. Again, a quick format, Shift Control and number 1 is going to give us 2 decimal places in a currency format over here. And then maybe we want to underline this as well. So Shift Spacebar and Alt H B O. And I've put a nice underlining there. My gross profit is going to be equal to that minus that, and so on. And it's picking up the format now. Maybe I need to insert another cell here, another row. So I'm starting to get my expenses, but maybe I forgot one. So if I push Shift and Spacebar, highlights the whole row again, and Shift, Control, and the plus key inserts a row for me. And then I could come along here and say other expenses or whatever else I wanted. And now you see my column is a bit too small again. So again, Shift Space highlights the whole column, Alt H O I, or widen it again. So I can quickly get used to these little controls, and everything is going to be much easier to do. If we want to put months across the top here, there's a very nice Excel function called EO month, which figures out what year you're in and how many days there are in the month and formats the date and so on. So I'm going to use it here. I'm going to say equals EO month. You just start typing it. Excel finds the formula, press the tab key to complete it. And then you say, okay, start of that month. You put comma 1, give me the next month. And you press enter, and it gives you an Excel date. To convert that into the actual format of a date, we can push Shift Control and the number 3 or the hash sign, and you'll see it gives you a date. Now, you can copy things in Excel in many ways. I could just click on this little button down here and drag all of this if I wanted to. And straight away, you can see I'm getting some column size problems. But since I'm already highlighting this, if I just go Alt H O I, it'll quickly format each of those columns to the widest point that they need to be for to fit those dates in. Now, let me undo that because I want to show you some other ways of actually copying stuff. So if I do Control Z, that undoes my last action. Control Z again undoes the previous action and so on. And you can keep going back, Control Z, Control Z. If you want to undo the undo, you do Control Y. And you'll see you can go both ways. Control Y and Control Z enables you to go backwards and forwards for commands that you have just put in. So another way of copying things is, of course, would be to do Control R. That will copy one date just to the right. If I want to copy it again, Control R. And you can also do, for example, Control D. That copies down. So it's copying that formula down there. That's actually not very useful for me because it's not really going to be what I want, but just to illustrate the fact that you can copy things across with Control R to the right, and Control D is a quick way of copying a formula or a number down in your spreadsheet. So we can do that with dates as well. If you want to copy something completely somewhere else in the spreadsheet, like that label maybe, we can do Control C. That puts it into the copy board. And then if you come across here and you want to put the label there, you just do Control V. So we can copy things easily like that, Control C, and then go where you want and press Control V, which pastes it. You can also do things. You can move things. Maybe I don't want the title there. If I do Control X instead of Control C and I put it there, you can see it deletes it and moves it to where I want it to be. So Control C copies, Control V cuts, and Control V pastes always. So, okay, let me keep going with my little model. So I'm going to come along here and maybe I want a few more dates across the model over here. And I'm going to do Alt-H-O-I to widen my formats. I forgot this one, Alt-H-O-I, and you can see it's looking nice and neat over here. Maybe I want to grow my revenues, my sales revenue. I would come down here, put in another parameter. I'm going to call this my sales growth rate. And you can see my column's a little bit too narrow again. Alt-H-O-I will widen it. But I want to label this whole row again so that it can be easily audited. And I want to put this name into the naming box here. Now, I could just type it, but I think if I press Control Shift F3, you can see it gives me some options. What must it create the name from? And I'm going to tell it, the one that's defaulted here is the left column. So I'm just going to press Enter. And now it's labeled this whole row, the sales growth rate. At least I think it has. Let's go and check it out. So if I put in a sales growth rate here of, let's say, 25%, you can see I can come in here now and I can say my next year's revenue will be equal to what it was times 1 plus that thing. And I just start typing it. I forgot to put in the @ sign. If you don't put in the @ sign, let me show you what happens. So I'm starting to type it. I'm pressing the tab key. It's picking up that row, which is quite nice. But if I press enter here, so I'm going to close the bracket and you're going to close the bracket and press enter, you can see I get this spill sign. That's because Excel's a bit confused. It sees a lot of things here. It's not sure whether you want to be in the same column, which we do. So we have to remember here, unless we want the entire array, which we don't, to put the little @ sign, and then it knows to go down across to the bottom and find that row and put that number into that row. If I come across and decide my sales growth rate next year is maybe going to be 15% less, I can say, let's say it's going to be equals that minus 15%, or I could have just typed in 10%. And it's picked up the format over here, except that this one doesn't have a decimal place, and this one does. So if you want to get an extra decimal place, if you go, I have to, if I think, I can't remember. We could, of course, do 2 decimal places. Alt-H, what do I want? I can't remember. Alt-H, it'll come to me. I'll come back to that. So here's my revenues, but I want to format that nicely with 2 decimal places. And I copy to the right with Control R, and you'll see it's now picking up this 10% here and growing my sales by 10%. So we can quite easily set up a very nice model, and using these little tips and tricks, move things around and format them and label them with the commands that we are quickly using. So if I wanted to save this, there's some more nice control shortcuts. You may know about those. I just press Control S and it'll save it. You can see I had already saved this actually, otherwise it would ask me for a name. So it just automatically saved it. So a good thing to do is to Control S as you build the model so that you keep saving it as you build it. If you do Control P, it automatically wants to print your model. And so you can do that. And what else? If you want to, I'm just using the Control key, so for all of these things. If you want to make the screen bigger, you just Control, and you can see I'm just moving my mouse button over here to make it, the text bigger or smaller. So press Control, move the mouse button backwards and forwards, and you can resize your text. What else is interesting? Once you've got a long model over here, you want to sometimes move around quite a lot. And maybe this is going to go quite far. Maybe we've gone quite a long way to the right here with a whole bunch of dates. Alt-H-O-I just formats them all so that the column widths are sorted out. But I don't want to have to keep scrolling button by button by button here to get to the end. So there are some quick ways of moving around the spreadsheet. For a start, if I push Shift and the left arrow, you'll see it takes me, it runs along the row until it gets to the end. So Shift left will take me there. Shift right will take me to the far end. Now, sometimes you actually want to highlight the whole row and maybe copy it down or something like that. So let's have a look. I can't see a good example of that, to be honest. But so maybe I want to copy this formula all the way to the end here. And so one easy way to do that would be to say Control-C, that puts it into memory onto the clipboard. And then I go to the far end of my model, come down one row. And if I push the Shift Control and the left arrow, it holds the point where I was, takes me back to where I started, and I can push Control-V. And you'll see it copies that formula all the way across. It isn't changing because at the moment we haven't actually put a sales growth rate in here. As I come and put that in, if I press Control-R, you'll see it's updating it and growing at 10%. But just to illustrate again what I did before, maybe I want to go, and it's a long spreadsheet, and copy that whole formula all the way. If I go Control-C, remember I'm on row 14, up here, and to move from here to here, I'm just holding the Shift key down. The Shift will take it, tells Excel to go to the next place where it finds, something that's not blank. Now I'm going to go, I'm keeping the Control button down and pressing the right arrow, takes me to the end. And what was that? 14, was it? I can't remember. Come back. Yes. So let me do that again. I'm going there and coming down, taking my finger off the Control key, Shift Control to the right, and I can now put that right away across that whole column. So you can easily move quickly around the spreadsheet by pressing the Control button and the arrows, which takes you to where it finds a different key. And if you want to highlight the whole key, you press the Shift and Control, then it highlights the entire row. So those are really nice, simple ways of moving around the spreadsheet. Once you have named a lot of things, maybe we've got several names that we've put into our spreadsheet over here, you sometimes kind of get a bit confused about what's called what and where it is and so on. Pressing the F3 key enables you to go and look at what we call the name manager. And you can see all the names that you've got, and you can edit them and so on. In fact, I think to edit them, you push Control F3, and that actually brings up the name manager. You edit, delete, and you can see where your names are in your spreadsheet. So that can be very useful for these kinds of things. So other things that are very helpful in Excel, which you may or may not know, is if, for example, we had a fixed thing like our tax rate, for example, I might come down here and type in the tax rate, and I want this just to be in one place. Unlike these other cells over here, which I might want to copy to the right, sorry, Control R. I want to just have one tax rate throughout the whole model. Maybe it's going to be 25%. So I put it in there. Then I'm going to actually label this cell as the tax rate. I can do it easily just by coming up here, if you like, and calling it the tax rate. And then wherever I refer to it, so let's say I've got some operating profit. I'm probably going to have interest down here, then I'm going to have tax paid, and so on. So maybe let me put in a few more numbers. Maybe I've got some expenses and other expenses and depreciation, and then I want my operating profit. So I am going to Shift and spacebar to mark the whole row, Alt HBO to underline that line because I've got a profit coming in here. Then I'm going to say this is going to be equal to my gross profit minus that, minus that, minus that. And it's pulling out my operating profit. My interest, maybe I've also got an interest rate down here. Interest rate, like that. You'll see I use quite a lot of what we call camel text, no spaces. Kind of makes things easy to read and takes up a bit less space. So quite common to use those things. I want to have just one cell with the interest rate, which let's say is going to be 5%, and it's going to apply throughout the whole model. So again, I can just come up here and call this the interest rate. And then it, because I'm on one cell, just labels the one cell. So my interest, well, that's actually going to be based on the amount of debt that I've got in here. But so for now, let's just put it in as $15. And my tax paid, well, maybe I need to insert a row. So to insert a row, Shift spacebar and push Shift Control plus, and it'll open up a place for us to do that. So I want to put in here, this is going to be my interest. This is going to be my earnings before interest and tax over here. And sorry, this is not really my true operating profit, is it? Anyway, let's just put this in here. This is going to be that minus that. And there's my EBIT. My tax paid is going to be my tax rate times the EBIT. So I'm going to say this is equal to that number times my tax. If I just start typing out tax, you'll see it finds the cell I'm looking for. Press the tab key. It highlights that cell and it works out my tax. I can Shift Control and press number 1 to format it nicely. And then maybe I want to underline the whole row again. I'm using the Shift space bar to do that. And then Alt HOI to, no, Control Z, Alt HBO, underline that. Then I want some more rows in here. So I'm pushing Shift and the space bar, Shift Control plus, plus, plus. I can put in a whole bunch of rows like that. And then I can put in here my net income. And I can just say this is going to be equal to my EBIT minus my tax paid. So I can build my little model like this. Once I've done it for 1 year, I can highlight this whole column and copy this across all the way to the end if I want to. This time I'm doing it the hard way. And Control V will copy my entire model all the way across there. So I'm starting to build up a nice little model using lots of tips and tricks. Maybe one or two things. Let's say we've made a mistake here, and that in fact our expenses, which seem to be very fixed here, we made a mistake. If you press F2, it allows you to edit the cell. And so I can then type in whatever I want. Let's make it 126 and press enter. It'll change it for that particular column. Quite often, we want to refer to a particular cell and lock it down. Here, I've labeled it, but maybe I had a cell that, let me see what else I could put in here. I've labeled all of these things, so I can't think of a particularly good one right now. But sometimes we might have an interest rate here. So I'm going to maybe delete the label that I've given to my interest rate over here. To do that, I'm going to go Control F3 to bring up the name center here. I'm going to find the interest rate here, and I'm just going to delete that for now. And it says, are you sure? I say, yes, delete that, close. And now when I work out the interest paid over here, you can see, well, actually I need some debt, don't I? So I'm not, let me put in a line of debt over here. This is going to be my debt. And my debt is going to be equal to, so I'm in the balance sheet over here now, 1,000, let's say. And I want to work out the interest on this. Maybe I need actually a couple of years of debt, because often we will do, I'm just quickly formatting that, we'll take the average debt. So maybe in this column here, I'm going to say my interest is equal to the average of my opening and closing debt. So I'm just using my mouse to highlight those two things. Take the average of those and then multiply that by the interest rate. Now, I haven't labeled the interest rate this time, so I'm just going to go there. But to lock it down, I'm going to press the F4 key. And you see that puts a $sign in front of the B and a $sign in front of the 21. So it's locking the column and the row. And I now want to use that. And if I copy this to the right, you can see wherever I am, it's run out of data now for my debt. Let's put in a few more numbers here. Let's say it's going to be that plus 100. And if I keep going to the right here, you can see my interest is able to be calculated by taking the opening and closing numbers, and it's locked down the interest rate with the $signs over here. If you just want to highlight the column or lock the column, when you press F4, let me just show you here. And let's say I've highlighted this cell over here. If you press F4 several times, you can just see it cycles through the various lockdown options. If you push it once, you get a lock on the column and the row. If you push it twice, it just locks the row. Third time, just locks the column, and the fourth time unlocks everything. So you can just cycle through these controls if you want to. So I think that's probably enough for our first run of this. I hope you found some of these things useful.